welcome to another episode of the Kielder Observatory podcast, and a very special episode this is as well. We often talk about space, but for the first time on the podcast, we're joined by someone who's actually been there.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis to assemble the framework for the science laboratories of tomorrow.
Hi, my name's Clay Anderson, Nebraska's first astronaut. Watching astronauts walk on the moon made me want to give up my paper route in baling hay for the chance to walk in space. I worked hard in school, and after college landed a job with NASA. I applied to be an astronaut 15 times. 15! And my dream was realized when NASA chose me to fly in space.
That is the voice of Clay Anderson, NASA astronaut, who, well, as he mentioned there, he applied to be an astronaut 15 times, got rejected 14 of them, but then finally he was selected and flew actually two separate flights to space on board the Space Shuttle to the International Space Station, and has spent 166 days, 21 hours and 10 minutes in space, and has conducted 6 individual spacewalks, some of which fairly lengthy, a total of 38 hours and 28 minutes outside of the space station. So we'll hear all of those experiences from Clay as he joins us now. Clay, welcome to the Kielder Observatory podcast. We spend time looking at space. You've been in it. Pretty simple first question, I guess. Simply, what's it like being an astronaut?
I was Superman every day. I woke up and I flew to breakfast, and then I flew to work. And if I needed a break, I flew into the bathroom, and I flew while I was going to the bathroom.
Well, I'll get the other second question out of the way early as well, because I asked my daughter, she's 8, and she's fascinated with space. She's always reading space books and stuff. So on the way to school this morning, I said, I'm speaking to an astronaut tonight. What's your one question? And I was thinking she's done all, she knows all about, the planets and black holes and all this. And do you know what the question was? And this is, she said, what's it like to have a poo in space? It was not what I was expecting, Clay. But I know that you've had an experience where perhaps the facilities let you down as well.
I can't believe the conversation has started
Well,
on this.
I would do 2 things when you go home tonight. Ask your 8-year-old daughter, since she loves to read about space, has she read any of Astro Clay's books? They're quite good. There's 3 children's books and 2 other ones. And then the other thing I would ask her is if she knows that Astro Clay hopefully holds the record. I've pooped in 4 different spaceships.
Excellent.
And the answer is you do it the same way you do on Earth, except you just need a vacuum cleaner. That's all.
Yeah, it's the question though, isn't it? This is the question that people, let's just not beat about the bush. This is the question people ask.
Or actually, they can try it at home if they put a diaper on and they lay on their back in their bathtub with their feet up against the wall, and if they drink their favorite beverage for a little while, they can practice peeing and or pooping in their diaper, and that would be a very authentic astronaut training exercise.
Superb. Okay, Clay, we've got the important questions out of the way. Let's talk about the rest of space. You obviously, I guess you will have grown up through the real era of the space race in America and man landing on the moon and all that. And by the time you were, I guess, graduating and making your choices in life, that it was a sort of start of the space shuttle era, wasn't it? So just take us back to the beginning on how you got into, working for NASA in the first place.
Well, I would actually go as far back as your 8-year-old daughter again. I was about 8 or 9, and my mom and dad got my brother and sister and I up on Christmas Eve in 1968, and we watched a black and white TV as the Apollo 8 astronauts went behind the moon for the very first time. And given that whole scenario of 2 big black and white cameras in mission control, just stationary cameras looking at that room with all men at the time, no women. Ellie, we fixed that since then. And the idea here was that all I could do was hear and see that visual. And so to listen to those words spoken by the flight director when he says, I need a go, no go for translunar injection burn, retro, go, JPO, go, FIDO, go, ECOM, go, surgeon, I'm go, right? Capcom, go. Everybody was go, right? And then they asked the guys in the Apollo 8 capsule, are you guys go? And I'm thinking, do they really have a choice? I mean, They're in outer space, for God's sake. So they do all that. They make that burn. They go behind the moon, and you don't hear anything from them for minutes, at least tens of minutes. And all you get is static back from these guys because they're not talking. They know that the moon has to be traversed for a certain amount of time. And so when they think they're getting to the point where they're coming out on the other side, then you hear the Quindar tone, the beep that everybody recognizes, and then the Apollo 8 Capcom, the capsule communicator, reaches out to the crew and says, "Hey, Apollo 8, Houston, over," and waiting for that response. And it takes a while, so they're still not sure what's going on, but eventually you hear the Quindar tone again, and the Apollo 8 crew says, "Houston, Apollo 8. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus." They said something to that effect as they came around the moon on Christmas Eve. And at that point, this 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid named Clay was hooked. I was ready to go. So now you fast forward to me being in college in 1981 at a place called Hastings College in Hastings, Nebraska, right? There ain't no MIT, there ain't no Caltech, there ain't no Purdue in my background, right? It was Hastings College. And in doing that, being at that school, it was happenstance. My career guidance counselor at the college was pheasant hunting in the fall of 1981. He just so happened to be pheasant hunting with a guy who graduated from Hastings College in 1961, who worked in Building 30 for NASA at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And as they're stomping around in the woods, the guy from Houston says, "Hey, did you know that NASA has a program for summer interns?" And the career guidance counselor says, "No, but we have a kid here who loves NASA. He's very interested in NASA. Well, maybe I can send you the information." And it turns out I would apply for a job as a summer intern. I would be one of 40 people selected out of 480 applicants. And I found myself in Houston, Texas in the June of 1981. So that began the quest for me to get full-time employment in Houston, which would lead to a second internship in Houston in 1982, followed by a job offer in 1983. And I never left.
But obviously you don't join as an astronaut. You're in there. You've got your foot in the door, I suppose. But there's a long way then to becoming that guy who's selected to be part of a mission and be on the space shuttle. So that was obviously the dream. Is probably
right.
Everyone's dream want to be that. But how then do you carve a path to becoming an astronaut?
That's a good question. A lot of astronaut people that I've run across in my career, they had a plan. They had everything lined out. They were going to do this. They were going to get a degree in physics, and then they were going to get a master's degree in blah, blah, and then they were going to get a PhD in blah, 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 and then they were going to get another PhD in blah, 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 and then they were going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro. They were going to get their pilot's license. They were going to scuba dive and get certified. They were going to right? Well, I didn't know any of that. I just knew that I was going to be the best worker that I could be, because my work ethic was ingrained in me as a young kid. When you're getting paid to do something, you better bust your ass, bust your hiney to do the best job you can, and then see where that leads. And so I would spend 15 years as an aerospace engineer working for the Johnson Space Center. And I'd start out just being a worker bee, and then they saw that I had some capabilities, and they moved me into higher responsible roles until eventually I became a boss. I became a supervisor. I would then become a branch chief at NASA, which was to supervise multiple supervisors. And then eventually I took a chance on a job that was being offered that was called the director of the Emergency Operations Center at the Johnson Space Center. So then I became the guy that was responsible for hurricane response, for terrorist response, for medical response, for fire response, for the whole Johnson Space Center entity, which was actually a really cool job. I really liked it. I did it for 2 years. And I think in the end that my 2 years in that position was what would cement me receiving another interview to become an astronaut, and then ultimately be selected as an astronaut. It put me in a position where more people saw me, more people worked with me outside of the little group that I had been in for 15 years. or 13 years, I guess. But it allowed me to get the exposure I needed to be an entity that the astronaut selection board knew something about.
And this is a real case of persistence, isn't it? Because like you're saying, with various people that get out of college, university or whatever, and they say they've got this plan, they're going to do this, their dad is that, and they've got a relation who's going to help them do this, that, and the other. But you don't always have that. Yours is hard work. And tell us how many times that you were told no, because I think that was quite a lot, wasn't it? The way where they said that you were not going to be an astronaut.
Well, I applied for 15 straight years, once a year for 15 years. I got rejected 14 times. In essence, maybe that's a little disingenuous in that they didn't select astronauts every year, but you had to submit your application every year to be considered for the next selection process. So to me, I had to apply every year. I was rejected every year 14 times until that 15th time. And some people would call it persistence. Some might say stupidity. But, once you've applied and once you've begun that process, for me, it was pretty easy just to update and say, well, what have I done since last year's application that is important to show them who Clay is and what Clay's capable of and those sorts of things. And like I say, there are a lot of astronauts way smarter than me. But I just tried to do the right thing. I tried to be the guy that worked hard and did the right thing. And here I am today, right? Woohoo!
And what was that? That's amazing. And what was the perseverance paying off like that? They're such good stories. What was the first thing that came to your mind, though, when they said yes? So you get the acceptance. What was the first thing that you thought of? The very first thing?
Oh, there are a lot of, that's a good question, too. A lot of these stories are in my first book, The Ordinary Spaceman, From Boyhood Dreams to Astronaut. That's kind of my memoir. I've read almost every astronaut memoir, and mine's the best. And I say that somewhat in jest, but, I tell stories that most astronauts don't want to tell. So, that may intrigue some people to go out and find that book. But this story is in the book. My wife and I were at the Kennedy Space Center because she had received an award. She had been given the gift of a free trip to a launch, and it turned out to be the final launch of the shuttle to take an astronaut to Mir, the Russian space station. And so she and I were in Florida for that launch. And then the next day we were headed back and we were at the Port Canaveral Lock Station. And the Port Canaveral Lock Station was told by us to be a great place to go look for manatees, right? Those big walrus-looking mammals. So my wife and I are scoping out looking for manatees. And my pager goes off. And for the young listeners out there, the pager is a device that precluded your iPhone and your smartphone. So I looked at my pager, and the number on there is like, what the hell number is that? Usually when you had a pager back then, you kind of got used to what area codes would talk to you normally. And it wasn't a Houston area code. The area code was 321. Well, a really smart person would understand that 321 was the Kennedy Space Center, right? 321 liftoff. But Clay's not very bright, and so it didn't dawn on me who this was. So then the next question is, well, we got to call somebody. It's a pager. I got to call them back. No cell phones, right? So how do I find a phone at the Port Canaveral Lock Station in Florida? Well, it's a government installation. So my wife and I looked around and we found a little government shack. And we went up to the shack and we looked through the glass window, and is anybody in there? And didn't see anybody, but I saw a black rotary dial telephone on the desk, the single desk that was in that building. And so needing to use that phone, I grabbed the handle of the door and I turned it and it was unlocked. And so here I am entering into a government building just to use the telephone. And we get in there and there's nobody in there. Hey, anybody in here? Nobody's there. So for 15 minutes, we're jacking with the telephone, trying to figure out how you dial out on the line, right? And I dial that number 321. So finally I get somebody that answers the phone, and the way it goes is I said, hello. And they say, astronaut crew quarters, how may I help you? And I said, well, my name's Clayton Anderson. I'm the director of the Emergency Operations Center in Houston, Texas, at Johnson Space Center. And I got paged by this number. And I figure you're looking for my wife because she works in the Russian Phase 1 Mir program, and she's way more important than I am. Stand by. Someone will be with you in a moment. And the line goes silent, right? And there's no music on the other end or anything like that. And then I'm looking at my wife, and she's standing there trying to figure out what's going on. And we're worried that somebody's going to come arrest us. And then the lady on the line comes back and says, Dave Leesma will be with you in a second. Well, then my brain started to function, and Dave Leesma was the head of the Astronaut Corps. And he was the head of more than that, but he was the boss of all the astronauts. And then I looked at my wife and I go, I think I know what this is. And so then Dave Leesma gets on the phone. He says, hey, Clay, this is Dave Leesma. Hi, Dave. How are you? You know, I mean, I'm kind of in shock, and I don't know what's coming. I kind of hope what's coming, but I'm not sure, right? And Dave says, hey, Clay, I just wanted to check with you and make sure that you're still interested in being a long-duration mission specialist astronaut candidate.
Are you still interested?
And I look at Clay, and I go, oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir, I am. Yes, sir. Thank you. I'd just been told I was going to become an astronaut, and I didn't really know how to react. I looked at my wife. She's bawling. Her mascara's running down her face, you know. And so it was a very short call because he had other calls to make. And so we hang up, and I look at my wife, and we're both crying, and we go, we got to tell somebody. And so we run out of the building, and there's nobody there to tell. Right? There aren't even any manatees. We didn't see a damn manatee the whole time we were there. What a disappointing trip that was. So then we go, well, what do we do next? We get in our rental car and we drive to the airport. Okay. So we get in the rental car, and the whole time we're talking and we're blabbering and blubbering, and we don't, well, what do we do? We don't, because there's no cell phones, right? So we drive to the airport. We drop off the rental car. We check in to our flight, and we go to the gate where, you know, in those days, there was a row of pay telephones. And so we picked up the phone, and I called my mother. She wasn't home. I picked up the phone again and called my sister. She wasn't home. I picked up the phone and called my brother, and he wasn't home. So then I picked up the phone and I called my father-in-law. He was home. And Jack was his name, and my father's name, who had passed away, was also Jack. But I had asked Jack many years back when I married his daughter if I could call him Dad, because I felt that he was a very special person in my life. She was a very special woman in my life, and I just wanted to call him Dad. And when I told Dad that I'd been selected as an astronaut, he started to cry. And now it makes me start to cry. That's how much it meant to him that this had happened to us. And as my wife would tell you, as soon as we got the call, right, our lives changed. And that's the biggest understatement you could ever imagine. Yeah, our lives changed. So there you go. That's the story of how I found out.
Curious about what happened afterwards. So after you find out that you've been selected, what is the training process like? How long does it take? What do you have to go through?
You know, before I tell you that answer, I'll tell you what happened after, you know, when we got on the airplane. And this was pretty amazing to me. As I walked down the center aisle of the airplane, it was full of NASA people, and they all started clapping. And I have no idea how they knew that I was selected to be an astronaut, but somebody had leaked that information, and they all started to applaud. So that was really cool. And then, you know, this all happened in June of 1998. And so I would report to NASA in August of 1998, and that's when the actual training process began. And I tell people it was kind of basic training, right? You had 25 American astronauts. You had, 25, 32, 7 international astronauts that were joining NASA as the class of 1998. And so the first year, or the first 6 months, we spent a lot of time traveling to all of the NASA centers around the country. We went to Goddard, we went to Glenn, we went to KSC, we went to Huntsville, we went to Ames, we went to JPL, We went to Stennis. We went everywhere. And the idea there was just orientation. And those are great trips. We got to know our classmates and find out who the snarky ones were and who the antagonists were and who the rule breakers were, right? You learn pretty fast about some of these folks. It's pretty interesting. But then we would come home to Houston and we would also be undergoing basic training. And Ellie, the unique thing for the class of 98 was that the class of 96 had 44 astronauts in it. Ours had 32, so that's a lot of new astronaut babies running around. And the folks in the 96 class had upset the apple cart somewhat in that the 98 class, we had to be videotaped and we had to take exams, right? So we were taught stuff. We had to study that stuff. And then we had to go take an exam on that stuff. And then when we took the exam, we were being videotaped so that we didn't cheat. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you just picked me to be a United States astronaut and you're worried that I'm going to cheat? Are you kidding me? It was the weirdest thing you ever saw, right? And it went on for a while that we were taught, we were taking an exam, and we were videotaped to see how we behaved. But I always thought that was kind of funny.
And the training process, obviously very thorough. People may have seen certain bits of it on TV, such as the underwater part of it that often gets shown. I guess it's fairly dramatic, where you're in the full suits, and I guess there's sort of gravitational stress training, G-forces, and what have you. So just talk to us, in a nutshell, really, about the training and the stuff that you have to put your body through.
Well, the first thing that everybody did was T-38 orientation training, and we flew in the T-38 jet. The biggest piece of that was to get us from one place to another when we needed to be in Florida or Huntsville. But it also gave the jet jockeys from the military, something that they enjoyed and looked forward to, right? Did they need to be flying in an airplane, to be an astronaut? No, not really. But it helped guys like me who'd never been in a jet figure out how to aviate, navigate, communicate at a very high speed, very high rate of speed, with the thought being that I was getting space flight awareness training, space shuttle awareness training. I just thought it was cool. It was a big challenge for me, but I loved it. And that was the thing that everybody began to do. Now, the other stuff you talk about, there was always systems training, right? You'd learn about the shuttle main engines. You'd learn about the shuttle navigation. You'd learn about the shuttle toilet system. And then then we had, this was an interesting thing to me. We had, in half of our class was going to go down the shuttle path because they were believed to be going to be shuttle flyers first. And then there were the rest of us that went down the station path because we were believed that we were going to be long duration mission specialists on the space station. Well, that changed what we trained on, right? So from shuttle systems over here for these guys, we were training on space station systems. And the promise and the idea is that we would crisscross back. After our first training was complete, we'd crisscross back and they'd learn station and we'd learn shuttle. That wasn't exactly how it happened. But to get to the fun stuff, like learning how to fly the Canadian robotic arm or getting into that spacesuit and getting into the water, that was a hell of a lot harder because there were 44 96 astronauts who were taking that kind of training and 32 of us who wanted to take that kind of training. And we were told by the spacewalk people in the astronaut office, don't get your hopes up for training on spacewalks. Don't get your hopes up. Don't put that on your dream list. Well, why not? Isn't that what every astronaut dreams of doing? Yeah, but we might not let you. Well, it was really weird, that kind of stuff. That was the stuff that I learned about that I never understood. Well, it's not supposed to be like this, but it was. And so people were constantly evaluating us as we went through T-38 training, as we did systems training on the shuttle and systems training on the space station. And they would put us in simulations as we learned those various pieces of how things work together. All of the training was challenging. A lot of memorization, a lot of repetition, a lot of skill-based stuff where you do it multiple times so that you learn it and it gets put up in your noggin. But it was all fun. Some of it was really boring, but most of it was pretty fun. Was it hard? I don't know that it was ever technically difficult, but the amount of information that was coming into your head was so voluminous that that's what made it hard. What do you remember? What should you remember? What should you blow off, right? There was just a lot of stuff hitting this little small dinosaur-sized brain in here. And being able to recollect what I needed to know when I needed to know that was part of the challenge for me. But most of it was fun. So the spacewalk training, when you finally get to put on that suit and you finally get to go in the water, you're still being evaluated. You're still being hazed because they're going to dump you in the water and you're going to do 4 spacewalk runs of 6 hours. And they're going to give you the hardest, weirdest, craziest tasks that they can give you to see how you deal with it and see how you deal with your spacewalk partner. And then, based on your abilities that you demonstrate, you may go into what they called spacewalk skills training. And that was a big, long training template of 10 or 12 runs where they began to say, okay, Clay's pretty good at this. We might ought to train him to do it for real. That was very competitive. That was very, what's the word I want? It was tedious to a certain level because you were still being evaluated by everybody. And, the fear of making a mistake was high. And your fear was, if you made that mistake, could you recover from making that mistake and continue to advance in your training? There was some weeding out going on. And I suppose that happens everywhere. I don't know if it happens with ESA astronauts.
And then eventually you did step out of the to do spacewalks. And at that moment of stepping out to do the spacewalks, did it feel as similar to the experience that you'd had in the training? Or did you open the door and think, whoa, this is totally different?
The easy answer is I found spacewalks in the pool to be much more physically exhausting and somewhat mentally exhausting. In space, I found those spacewalks to be totally mentally exhausting. The weightless environment takes away a lot of the physical adversity that you dealt with in the water, where you have water resistance, you have weight, you can't be upside down because the blood rushes to your brain, all those things as you're simulating being neutrally buoyant. When I opened the hatch for my very first spacewalk on July 23rd, 2007, I was the lead spacewalker. What? And I was going out with a Russian cosmonaut, and his English was about as good as my Russian, so we spoke Runglish. And I had never done one before. I had no idea really what to expect except the training that I'd received in the water. So in the water, though, you go out the hatch, you're looking at the bottom of the pool. It's 40 feet deep. So there it is. Hey, I see the bottom. And that gives your brain and your body a sense of calm and serenity. When I did it for real and I opened the hatch, it was pitch black. The sun was behind the earth, right? You couldn't see anything. It was the blackest black I'd ever seen. I saw icicles shooting from the left side of my back, from my backpack out into the vacuum of space, right? So there was a pressure differential between just inside the hatch to the vacuum. And so it was shooting those ice particles that were disappearing in the blackness of space. It was really cool. And I'm just floating there thinking, I was born to be here right now doing this. And so I didn't have fear. I didn't think I was going to fall. I didn't have much anxiety. I just knew I had a job to do and that I was totally capable of doing that job. Now, Fiodor, my Russian cosmonaut partner, he made it a little difficult for us in that the week before the spacewalk, he would float to me in the space station. He'd say, Clay, spacewalk soon. Go slow. Be careful, Clay. Okay, Fiodor, got it. Thanks. It's great advice. Appreciate it. A couple days later, Clay, spacewalk soon. Go slow. Be careful. Okay, Fyodor, I got it. Thanks. Appreciate you sharing that. A couple days later, Clay, spacewalk tomorrow. Go slow. Be careful. Okay, Fyodor, locked it in, baby. Go slow. Be careful. So we get out the hatch. I go out first, right? I'm hooking up all the safety tethers to make sure that we're not going to, do something stupid or whatever. And Fyodor, he keeps handing me, his arm sticks out of the hatch and he's handing me a tether. And in Russian, the word fall means tether. And so, Clay, fall. Clay, fall. And I said, no, не нужно. We don't need it. It's not supposed to come outside, right? Fyodor, не нужно fall. Внутри, inside. Keep it inside. Clay, fall. So he insisted on giving me this tether. So I finally took it and told the ground, hey, I'm taking this extra tether. I'm going to put it in bag A or whatever so that we don't lose it, because you gotta know every piece of equipment that goes out in the vacuum of space, you have to track how many hours, right? Because that tells the ground when they should replace it and that sort of thing. So Fyodor eventually comes out of the hatch. I'm already out there still jacking with all this stuff to get set up. And I look around and he's gone. The guy that was telling me, go slow, be careful, he's gone. I can't see him anywhere. And I said, in my best Russian, I suck it up and I go, Fyodor, остановить, stop, пожалуйста, please. Нам нужно делать вместе. We need to do this together. And there's a big dead silence, right? And then I hear, okay. and here he comes. And he crawls back, right? So now I can see him again, and then we move off together, and but those are funny stories, but they're true stories, right? Maybe embellished a little bit, but we worked for 7 hours and 41 minutes outside the space station in the vacuum of space, and we did not make one mistake in 7 hours and 41 minutes. So for me, being a rookie spacewalker, Fyodor was kind of a rookie, but he had done 2 spacewalks the previous in April. So that he arrived in the station in April. And so here we are in July doing my first spacewalk, but he'd done 2 with his cosmonaut buddy Oleg Kotov before I got there. So he had a little bit of experience in the environment in a Russian suit, but now he was outside with me in American suits. So 7 hours, 41 minutes without making a mistake is pretty good. And that's a pretty long spacewalk for your first one.
When the door opens, though, you said you're the lead astronaut, a spacewalker in this on this job. There must be that brief moment where, the reality of it sort of hits in. And you're talking there about you had no fear, but I guess it is your natural instinct, though, to sort of be aware of the obvious dangers that you've just sort of alluded to there, that there must have been a brief moment where there was no safety net until you get yourself fully sort of hooked up on there. Just talk to us about that.
Well, I think that's where the NASA trains the fear out of you. I had anxiety because the astronaut prayer is, dear Lord, please don't let me this up, right? And I didn't want to be that guy. Being a rookie spacewalker with the lead and all the responsibility for the successful execution of that whole spacewalk, that's a lot of anxiety to put on my shoulders. But I'd been pretty well trained, and they train the fear out of you. So you go out knowing that A, you have a job to do, B, you're the lead spacewalker, and you're going to ensure that those two work together to make sure we get back in the hatch safely with all the mission objectives accomplished. So I don't know. Yeah, I knew I was going into the vacuum of space. Yeah, I knew that I was tethered, and if I fell off the space station, I would have to use the backpack to get back and all those things. But the expectation is that people trained you well, the equipment's going to perform well, and you're not going to find yourself in one of those situations. If you do, you'll fall back on your training, you'll fall back on the advice from the ground, and everything will get dealt with appropriately.
Clay Anderson is the one that has the all-white spacesuit. He is getting very close to wrapping up this rate gyro assembly replacement. The team here in Houston just got the go-ahead to activate the new one.
That's you, Clay?
Yes.
Okay, so you're probably off of like 169 or 168?
Well, it's actually got a label. It says Bolt 2.
What? It has a label?
Yeah.
All right. Well, even better.
in that time, 38 hours or so, or more that actually you've been in total from your various missions and spacewalks. Yeah, that's a long time. It must be incredible, though, whilst you're completing a task, you must occasionally get this, well, maybe all the time, get this view of Earth that obviously is reserved for very, very few to see the Earth back home from that angle, and take a few moments just to take that in.
Yeah, that's a thing you have to consciously do. The ground is constantly pushing you to advance the timeline, right? I don't know if you guys have listened to NASA TV in a while, but you'll always hear the phrase, "Oh, yeah, you're ahead of timeline, you're ahead of timeline, you're ahead of timeline."
As we mentioned, the crew is right on the timeline this morning. They're making very good progress.
I hated that. I hated that they would tell me that. Don't tell me I'm ahead of the timeline, because that causes you to think that that's your focus, to stay ahead of the timeline. Your focus is to do the job safely and come back inside when it's done. And so that always aggravated me to hear those words, and it still does as I listen to spacewalks, because you're not a good crew unless you're ahead of the timeline. And that's a nuance that I thought created pressure on some. But being out there and taking that break to say, I want to see the Earth, because it's amazing. And the coolest thing is, we went out in darkness on that first EVA, but then when the sun came around and you saw everything light up, and it's like, whoa, because the Earth is way bigger than you think it's going to be. It's way brighter and more colorful than you think it's going to be. And it's moving way faster below you than you think it's going to move. But it takes your breath away, and it takes more focus then to quit looking at the Earth and get back to work and do the jobs you need to do. But the one question people always ask, and I know it's on your mind too, Ellie's thinking it right now, is how did seeing Earth from space change you? And astronauts talk about the overview effect, and they talk about the orbital perspective and how it changes how you view our planet and how you view our spaceship Earth. And we're all crew on the spaceship Earth. Totally get it. Totally agree. But for me, I'm a man of faith. And when I looked at all that, all I could think of was none of this is random. None of it. It's all ordered. It's there because it's supposed to be there, the way things work. We are on the planet Earth. We are the exact correct distance from the sun to allow life to flourish. We are the only human species known on the planet, known in the solar system, known in the Milky Way galaxy, and probably currently known in the entire universe. To me, none of that's random. So all it did was strengthen my faith in God and make me think that there is order among the chaos. And I just find that fascinating. I just saw on social media today, somebody had a pendulum with a weight on the end, and it had been above a little thing of sand, and an earthquake hit. And so this thing managed to stay working or functioning throughout that earthquake. And then it showed the pattern that was generated by this pendulum as the earthquake rumbled through. And you look at the sand, and it's not random, it's ordered. And that just blew me away, right? And it just reinforces my belief that all of this is ordered. None of it is random.
That's really interesting, because that is a question that we get a lot at the observatory, actually, is that what is that relationship between science and religion, astronomy and religion? And is it that all cosmologists or astronomers are anti-religion? And I'm pleased you said it that way, because I know so many that say the same, that say that the study of the universe and uncovering the universe has actually strengthened their belief, and that order is the thing that's led them down that path. Just thinking about that experience that you had then, because something that really, at the moment, I keep thinking about is, imagine if we took all the world leaders from the conflict that we had right now and we stuck them into space. How do you think that would change the way that the world functions?
See, I think you're onto something, Dan. I think that everybody needs to go to space for a week or two, but then we need to take them out of space and we need to put them in a third world country for a month. right? If you do those two things, I believe the perspective of humans will begin to change. The other thing I tell people, and I'm actually in April of next year, I'm going to give a lecture at Hastings College on the exact subject of science and faith. And one of the things that I also tell people is that we are here with a developing brain, right? We are here today doing a Zoom call with you guys in England from Nebraska because our developing brain allowed us to go from Cro-Magnon or whatever the prehistoric man was to where we are today. And that developing brain continues to develop in people around the planet all the time. And that allows us to figure out ways to solve problems. Again, it's not random, it's ordered. And when you look back into the universe and begin to figure out what happened to get Earth to where it is today and the other planets and all those things, that's because of our developing brain. But I'll also go back to people and say, look, as long as there's hatred and envy in our world, we'll never have the United Federation of Planets that Captain Kirk was so proud of, right? Because that hatred, that jealousy, that envy is what causes people to not be able to do what we want to do as a single species. I have hope that one day we'll figure that part out, but that's going to be, to me, the hardest, most difficult piece of this. I mean, just look at the Earth today. You know, all of the four of us would love to be working together to solve issues and make the world a better place. But there are other people trying to take over lands, and they're fighting wars, and they're killing people. And why are they doing that? They need what we have, or they want what we have. Well, why don't you just stop fighting and talk to us about maybe figuring a good way to give you what we have or what you want, right? Why does it have to be that you take what you want and you take that land in Ukraine or wherever the hell it is, Gaza and all those things? And to me, that's a disappointing part of the human psyche, but that's the way it's been ever since humans have been on the planet, right? The Cro-Magnon man, right? He whacked the other Cro-Magnon man on the head if the guy had a brontosaurus steak that he wanted to eat, right? It's just, that's the part that I hope our brain develops past all of that envy and hatred and jealousy and moves to a new place where we can coexist, because that's the hardest piece.
And I guess from space, that's even more brought home to you by the fact that the boundaries between the countries and these parties now that we see on Earth that we know are at war, that you don't see that from space. You just see this patchwork beneath you, and it probably all seems fairly even more crazy, irrelevant almost, these borders that we know and everybody sometimes fights over.
Well, and and the other piece of my philosophy is that NASA should be partnering with Russia and India and China and ESA and Japan and Canada. We should all be partnering in space. If we do that, it doesn't guarantee anything, but it does lend itself to less conflict on the ground. If you look at what we've done with Russia over the last, International Space Station time period from 1998 till now, how many times has Russia fought the United States? None. Do we have differences? Yes. But they need us and we need them. That's an important aspect of this. They need us. We need them. So why is that precluded with China? Why? China probably needs us, and we probably need China. Why can't we have a taikonaut on the International Space Station? Why can't we have a U.S. astronaut on board the Tianyang, or is that what it's called? I think. Anyway, their space station, right? This whole thing, and we're starting to figure this out with our developing brain. We cannot get to Mars, although maybe Elon can, by ourselves. There's not enough brain power. There's not enough money. There's not enough understanding. We all need to work together to go to that venue as a collective species, not as individuals. And maybe Elon will upset that apple cart a little bit. I don't know. But it remains to be seen. Yet I still would be an advocate, and I have advocated on social media. You can follow Astro Clay and find all sorts of bad stuff that I've said over the years, right? About partnering with China, about, I'm a climate realist, not a climate denier, blah, 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 blah. And so all of those things, I just go back to my faith and my understanding that none of this is random, that it's all ordered. So, yeah, I think we should be partners with these guys. I think we should solve problems together. And you can see the collective brain power that when it works well.
You're listening to the Kielder Observatory podcast from Kielder Observatory in Northumberland, UK, and we are joined by NASA astronaut Clay Anderson, talking about his experiences on the International Space Station. Ellie, over to you next.
I guess I kind of want to stay on this conversation about a perspective on Earth, but I want to sort of talk a bit more literally about it. So, while you're on the International Space Station and you look down at the Earth, is there like a favorite view, like a country that is particularly beautiful that you just wanted to see every time it came over or you went over it?
Yes. And interestingly enough, for me, it was the Sahara Desert. Now, do I want to visit the Sahara? It's a little nasty there, right? But when you fly over it from space, and when you capture pictures of it and then enlarge those pictures on your camera, you see that it's an incredibly varied space, right? The deserts all look different, and they can look different from one pass to another just because of the way the wind blows the sand around, right? But again, if you look at pictures that I've taken of the desert on my website and stuff, it's still ordered. It looks like an ordered symmetrical deal. And that is amazing to me. So I loved looking at Patagonia. I would fly, if you could get a look through the Russian side windows. We didn't have the cupola back then, so the cupola gives you a great 360-degree view. I would love to go back to the station for a month and just sit in the cupola every day and look and take pictures. But I won't get that chance because I don't have enough money to be a castronaut. And that's what it takes today to become a castronaut. I coined that phrase too, by the way. Hashtag it.
That's a good phrase.
But, Ellie, the actual, one of the cool stories for me was you asked what place that I wanted to go over all the time. And it turns out it was my hometown. And right now I'm sitting in my hometown. I'm running a museum in my hometown in Ashland, Nebraska. And the story that I like to tell is we have a software program that tells you where you're going to be over the Earth with multiple orbits. And I looked at that one day, and it was early in my increment, and I looked at the trace of the ground track that was coming up, and we were going to fly right between Omaha and Lincoln, which are two cities that border my hometown. And so I grabbed cameras. I made sure I had batteries that were charged. I had the right lenses I wanted. I had everything ready to go. And I Velcroed it all the way around the window in the U.S. lab that looked at Earth. It looked straight down. And so my plan was to set a timer, which I did, that said it's going to beep just before we get over Ashland. And I'm going to take a bunch of cool pictures of my hometown. So I'm at my laptop doing some work, and I hear the buzzer go off, and it shows that we're coming in over Northwest Washington State, and we're going to travel northwest to southeast right over my hometown. Well, then I'm thinking, well, how the hell do I know when I'm over my hometown? I mean, there's no star over Lincoln, the capital. There's no Omaha is not in a bigger font than Lincoln because Omaha's got more population than Lincoln. And there's no squiggly Platte River written by the river that goes down below Ashland and meets with the Missouri River, which is the squiggly line between Nebraska and Iowa. And I'm kind of freaking out going, how am I going to do this? So I look through the window over the northeast part of the Rocky Mountains, and I start to see that I can find lakes and dams. Well, if I can find lakes and dams on the Missouri River coming out of the Rocky Mountains, I can follow the Missouri River down to the squiggly line between Iowa and Nebraska. And then I can look for the Platte River, and I can look to see if I can find my hometown. So I'm laying down in the window, looking this way, right, as we're coming northwest to southeast and trying to figure out where I am. And I'm kind of following it. And I think I know what I'm doing. And I get down to where I see finally the squiggly line that is northwest Iowa, northeast Nebraska, right? And I'm following it down. And I look for Omaha. And Omaha is just a big gray blob with your naked eye. And Lincoln is a smaller gray blob. But the nice thing for me is my hometown is right on the south bend of the Platte River. And if you can find that south bend in the highway that goes through there, you can kind of X marks the spot. And so I'm getting closer and closer and closer. And when I finally flew over 5 miles a second, 17,500 miles per hour, I took 0 pictures. And I took 0 pictures because I was crying. I was floating in the International Space Station in the lab module, looking through the lab module window at my hometown, and all I could do was cry because I was 240 miles above the people and the place that had made me the human that I am today. And it was just emotionally overcoming, and so I didn't take a single photograph.
It's taking that moment as well, isn't it? Like you're saying, that to really take it all in. Clay, we could talk to you all night, but just one other thing I wanted to talk about. People probably wondering about you. I think this is something that's now reserved for a certain era of astronaut, of course. But you were an astronaut on the space shuttle, which is something certainly I grew up with, and I had models of the space shuttle in my bedroom. And I think everybody of sort of my kind of era, anyone who was grown up through the 80s or 90s, that was the mode of transport until very recently, respectively, of course, to get to space. And you flew on Atlantis and Discovery, I think, was one you travelled on particularly a few times, didn't you? Talk to us about that, because of course you talked about the training, but I guess the moment where you fully, you're in there, you're strapped in, the hatch is closed, and that whole countdown procedure really begins, especially for the first time. I guess it's probably still as exciting the second time, but that must have been quite something to be part of, and to be strapped aboard this rocket that's going to just basically full of explosives. It's going to get you into space. It's quite a vehicle to be on.
You're correct in all counts. When I first climbed on Atlantis, that was another one of those anxiety days because I'd never done this before. I watched my fellow crewmates who had done it before. I watched what they ate for their meal before we went to the pad. I was kind of an afterthought for the STS-117 crew on Atlantis. I had been moved from STS-118 to 117 to launch earlier to rescue Sunny Williams, who's still up there today.
Indeed.
She is.
Yes, quite a career.
But yeah, she was worried. They were worried about her radiation dose. Well, apparently they're not worried anymore. But to get on that vehicle and follow that process was very exciting. It was very new. It was sort of understood, but not, right? You can only learn so much in a book and learn only so much in a lecture. But when you're actually putting your suit on and you're after having lunch with your crew and you're going to get bussed out to the launch pad and actually see and hear that vehicle sitting on the launch pad, it's pretty overwhelming. And to get strapped in and then listen, and that's how you figure out where you are in the timeline, is by hearing it, not seeing it. I was not in the cockpit, the flight deck cockpit, so I didn't have the opportunity to look at computer screens and see the countdown timer and all that stuff. But I had to listen and hear what was being said over the loops, and that gave me a sense of how we were progressing on the timeline. I thought that was really cool. I wasn't nervous per se, but I was anxious. I was getting on this rocket with explosives, and the potential existed that I would never see my family again. And another quick story was, before you get on that rocket, you have an opportunity to make a phone call to your family from the 195-foot level on the pad. And it was my turn to use the phone. And, going back to the manatee story, you had to dial 8 to get an outside line. And when I dialed 8 and dialed my wife's cell phone number, she couldn't hear me. I could hear her, but she couldn't hear me. and she was panicking because she was scared. And honey, do you hear me? Do you hear me? No, I can't hear him. It's Clay. I know it's Clay. Oh God, I can't hear him. Oh, ah. And she was freaking out. So then I had to make the decision, do I hang up and try again? And there are people waiting behind me, right? I'm in my slot and I'm supposed to get on the shuttle in moments. And do I take that time? So I did. I hung up, I redialed, I got her, and she could hear me. And that was what she needed to hear to calm her down, to be able to deal with this launch with my two kids who were 10 and 6. So, again, God blessed me by giving me that opportunity to talk to her one last time before I got on that rocket. So now you change that whole thing becomes very exciting, very cool, very fist bumpy, high-fivey. And you're trained to do your job, and you don't want to make a mistake because you don't want to be that person who screwed up and didn't let Ellie do her job, and then Ian do his job, and then Dan do his job, right? Because I didn't want to be the broken link in the chain. And fortunately, I wasn't. But then you fast forward to my second mission on Discovery, and I was the veteran. I had more time in space than all 6 of my crewmates combined. And so it was really cool to relax and enjoy the ride and to watch the rookies that were undergoing what I went through 3 years prior, right? To see them giddy, to see them giggle, and to see them, oh, whoa, this is crazy, as we're going uphill in a freaking explosive rocket that could kill us all. Fortunately, that didn't happen. And, those 2 experiences are 2 that I count among the greatest in my life. I pooped in both of those spaceships, by the way. And if I'd have been a smart astronaut when Endeavour docked in August of 2007, I would have flown over and pooped in Endeavour. Then I could say I pooped in 5 spacecraft, and that probably would be a world record. But unfortunately, I didn't do that. So.
Wow, that would be quite some record. But then you've got the countdown, as you say. You weren't one of the pilots, I guess, of the shuttle. So you sat further back. And you can talk to us about the configuration if you like. But you can hear the countdown. I guess you get to that point where you start to feel some vibrations, that the engines are firing up, and obviously by that time you're very much point of no return. And this is not something that's not like being an airline pilot, for example, where you go in a simulator. You can go in a simulator, but you only get one crack at doing this for real. There's no sort of practice flight where you give it a go, where you're actually flying to space. You only do it for real. That for the first time, that time you're on the pad and everything's burning away.
Yeah, that's a unique experience. You feel all of those feelings, those sensations, those emotions, but you're in the back of your head, you're saying, man, I hope they trained me well, right? And I hope they trained those 4 people sitting on the flight deck, because if something were to go wrong and we have to enter that procedural world of off-nominal stuff, then you want everybody to be able to do their jobs correctly.
Minus 10, 9, 8, 7, main engine start, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis to assemble the framework for the science laboratories of tomorrow.
Houston now controlling.
Houston, Atlantis, roll program.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
And that's probably where I had the most personal doubt, was had I paid attention enough.
Atlantis' roll maneuver is complete. The orbiter's in a heads-down position, on course for a 51.6 degree, 137 by 36 statute mile orbit.
Had I memorized enough, had I taken enough notes to be able to do the things that I needed to do, my part to keep us all safe.
All systems in good shape. Engines throttling down as Atlantis prepares to maneuver through the area of maximum dynamic pressure on the vehicle in the lower atmosphere. Already 7 miles away from the Kennedy Space Center at an altitude of 5 miles.
Fortunately, I never had to find that answer out from any of my crewmates or me. But the shuttle's an amazing piece of machinery in that everything went right on all of my flights, on all of my missions. Every vehicle that came to the station or took me up and down, they all launched exactly on time with no anomalies. It's just amazing. And it blows my mind because, you watch the Starliner thing and you go, well, holy crap, that didn't work very well. But everything that happened from my time in space, every single thing went exactly as it was supposed to go. Why is that? I don't know. Maybe there's something I'm supposed to do in my future, like become the president of the United States, or who knows, right? But maybe there's something planned out there for me in this world of order that I believe in, that is ahead of me, right? That kept me alive and kept us safe. And I'm grateful for that. I don't know who to thank, but I'm really grateful. And that just goes back to all the people that are involved with the space shuttle and making the vehicle physically safe, and writing the procedures and writing the software code that operate all the systems. I mean, golly, what an amazing thing. And then you look at what Elon's doing and what Bezos is doing and what Virgin Galactic's doing, and you go, yeah, this is incredible where we are today. The next 5 years are going to be pretty amazing, I think, just to see what happens, right? Maybe nothing will happen. Maybe the whole thing will go kaput. But the optimism with what I've seen Mr. Musk do and Mr. Bezos do, and hopefully Virgin will continue to do, right? There's a lot of cool stuff happening, but I would caution the three of you to not use the phrase space is for all, because it's not yet. I get really frustrated with that phrase too. Just like staying ahead of the timeline, I don't like to hear space is for everyone. We want space to eventually be for everyone, but you have people today that can't afford to take an airplane ticket somewhere, right? And until that cost is available for Joe Average to be able to be a astronaut, it's not for everybody. I think, what was the flight that just went? Was it a Blue Origin flight that took some of those people up? The Space Gal, Calandrelli, and some of those people? Well, somebody paid for them to go. They didn't pay for them to go, but somebody did. And that somebody, whoever it is, good for them. Great for all the other ones that got the opportunity to go. But how many people do we have to pay to have every human on the planet go to space like we talked about before? That's a lot of cash. And until you can buy a ticket on your own for a reasonable cost and spend 3 days in a space hotel, or fly the Blue Origin rocket for 5 minutes, or the Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2, whatever they are, until that happens, it's really not for everybody, even though we want it to be.
Finally, just talk us through the final part. This is the difference that astronauts now will not experience, really. Is the whole flying back to Earth on the shuttle a different experience to sort of plunging down and plummeting into the ocean? You're coming back and landing on a runway like an aircraft. That was the beauty of the space shuttle, of course, but a different experience, I suppose. You've got that whole re-entry part that must be fairly dramatic as well, and then coming in and finding this spacecraft is flying like a plane finally at the end of the mission must be a bit of a surreal experience as well.
Yeah, and it made it really nice in that on the first flight home, I was on the middeck laying on my back. And so my feet were in a locker on the shuttle's middeck wall. And it was a very comfortable experience. I didn't see anything. We had a camera that was linked to the flight deck, but Scott Parzynski and Doug Wheelock, they hogged the camera, right? So it was hard for me to see this little screen. But then I got to do it again on Discovery in 2010, and I got to sit on the flight deck. And that was a lot neater experience for me in that I got to actually see the glow of us going through the atmosphere when we heated up to 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit, and the plasma around the windows was all orange. And yeah, there was buffeting as we went and did our roll reversals and banked right to left in the atmosphere. It was a much more dynamic experience. And the one I'd been trained for, right? The one you learn about when you're a baby astronaut and they teach you about all that sort of stuff. And then finally, I got to look out the window on the right side of the shuttle as we screamed at 205 miles an hour across the threshold and see all the people standing down on the ground. And that was kind of cool. It was very short, but we got to see them as we sped by them. But yeah, I would love the opportunity to go on a SpaceX Dragon or a Starliner or a Russian Soyuz for that matter, and do the parachute thing and come in like a gumdrop and then smack into the ground or smack into the water. That would bring the whole experience that I had to full circle. But I'm never going to get that opportunity. So I just have to live vicariously through others. It'd be tough, though, to land after a long-duration space mission in the ocean when it's doing this, right? I can only imagine how my body would tell me I was going to puke again, because I had that same issue when I came home on the shuttle, right? So, motion sickness is real. And after many days in space, it becomes even more real. The astronauts that are flying with these guys, you never hear them talk about that when they get out. Oh, God, the view was so wonderful. Oh, it was such a great experience. None of them come out of the thing and say, I puke like a crazy person. Bleh. That, to me, would be way more fun if they'd come out and they'd be honest and say, it was a really great flight, but man, it made me puke like crazy when we landed. Because most of them did.
Is that you completely done now then? No more space at all? Completely ruled out?
I don't know. Do you know any billionaires that want to talk to me? So my deal is that wouldn't I be a great babysitter? So you go back to this, I think Elon had talked to this guy, this billionaire from Japan, and he was going to fly 100 of his best buddies. He was an artist or something, and he was going to fly them, and they were going to go around the moon and come home and do like a 3 or 4 day mission. I'd be the perfect babysitter for those guys, right? I'd be like on a cruise where I give lectures on space while they're traveling around the backside of the moon. But nobody's called me, and I don't expect them to call me. So, so I'm probably done.
You never know.
And my bank account can't bankroll a astronaut invoice. So
I've got one final question, but it's not actually a question from me. It's a question from my niece, Daisy. And to be honest, it's a fantastic question. We could have spent the entire podcast just answering it. But she wants to know, how cool is it in space?
Well, you tell Daisy that it's the coolest thing that I've ever done, aside from witnessing the birth of my kids. And witnessing the birth of my kids was way shorter than 167 days in space. And as we talked before, I would wish that every human sometime in their life would get that opportunity, because I do think it would make us a better planetary species. There are so many cool aspects of space. Eating food in space is cool. Pooping and peeing in space is cool. Doing exercise in space is cool. Looking out the window and taking photos is cool. It's all cool, but some of the coolness can become boring over time. It's like anything. If you do it enough, it has to continue to be exciting for you. And there were a lot of things I did on my 5 months on the space station that turned out to be kind of boring. And so you kind of have to still be able to look to find the uniqueness and the fun in everything you do. And if you don't find it in this thing, we'll try something different to make sure that you're maximizing the experience. That's why I'd love to go back, right? It would give me a chance to maximize the experience, because I've done it now, and with a astronaut type mission, I don't really have any responsibility, except maybe I'll have an experiment or two to do, but 5-minute experiment, big deal. But I would not be tied down to memorizing procedures and speaking Russian and all those things. I could just enjoy the ride. And I think that would be ultimate coolness.
Here in the Northeast, we have a museum in Newcastle called the Centre for Life, and they've got a mock-up of a section of the International Space Station. And in there, they've got a thing that you can smell, which they say is the smell of the space station. And it's quite clinical smelling, a bit like a hospital, but with an essence of burning. Would that sort of be about right?
So what they're trying to do, I think, is they're trying to capture two different smells, right? There's the outside smell and the inside smell. The inside smells very clinically, very hospital-like, because it's a self-contained environment with a really highbrow environmental control system that sucks all the stink out and puts back in oxygen and things and air. But the outside part, when you come in from outside, you can smell the smell of space. I don't know what it smells like, but I could instantly recognize it if I smelled it again. So if I went to that museum, my hope would be that I would smell outside space, because that's this burning, or, astronauts say, well, it smells like when you're welding, or it smells like when you're burning ozone. Well, who the hell knows what burning ozone smells like? I mean, is there a candle I can go to, Bed Bath & Beyond and get the burning ozone candle? I would love to have that, because
special astronaut range.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that would be the smell, but yeah, I think of them as two distinct things. So it'd be really interesting for me to go to that museum. So if you have a sponsor over there that wants to pay my travel and my hotel and stuff, and let me do a couple of beaches, and I'll come over.
Yeah, that would be good. Well, you'll definitely be welcome at Kielder Observatory. That is for sure. So if ever it happens, let's hook up and make something of it. But thanks for joining us, Clay. I think we'll better let you get on with doing whatever else it is you have to do today. But thanks for spending so long with us, and maybe we can pick up the conversation at another point, because it's been fascinating chatting with you. As I say, there's so many questions. We could go on for hours and hours, but really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. I'd love to come back with you again sometime, and the only thing I got coming up is my nap. So, but that's pretty important to me at my age.
Thanks, Clay. And sorry for taking up so much of your time. I think that's it. No, just other than, is there anything that you want to quickly promote or say while you're here to our...
Oh, I have 5 books out there. You can find them at astroclay.com, which is my website. And then I'm on all the socials. If you Google Astro Clay, you will find me. And if you get on the socials and look for hashtag Astronaut, you'll find me. And the other hashtag that I'm famous for is never bet against Elon Musk.
Wise advice, that, yeah.
Yeah, fairly wise advice. It's a rich man's game.
Yeah, one that I'm not playing in, by the way.
Thanks for joining us once again, Clay Anderson, NASA astronaut. It's been fascinating chatting with Clay, and hopefully we can hook up with him again some other time. Hopefully you can come and see us, though, in the meantime at Kielder Observatory. Find out all the details of the upcoming sessions you can book onto at kielderobservatory.org. It's getting busy for the remainder of 2024, but you've got the whole of 2025 to go at. Get on there, book in advance, plan your visit, and some special one-off events here and there as well to look out for too, plus the kids events, which are on a little bit earlier in an evening as well. So get on, have a look, and choose something that takes your fancy, and hopefully we'll see you soon. If we don't speak to you again on the podcast, have a fantastic Christmas and New Year wherever it takes you, and we will speak to you in our next episode very soon on the Kielder Observatory podcast.